you were making, 400K a year, and then you essentially use that to get a mortgage or something in the San Francisco Bay Area, now your total comp isn't that high anymore, and now you still have to make those mortgage payments, right? It's like you were assuming that it was going to be 400K consistently. So it's almost like every other kind of gambling investment thing from like 2021, 2022, crypto. You thought you had a lot, and then hopefully your lifestyle creep didn't like increase to that amount, especially when it comes to bigger things like housing or car payments and responsibilities and stuff.
I mean, that to me is probably the most scary thing. So Jay, welcome to your second appearance on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast.
I'm so honored.
Yeah, this, you were one of, I think maybe the like second or third episode that I did. So I'm glad that we could come full circle like a year and a half, 2 years later and have you back in.
Yeah, and this is great. We're in, I remember the first time we also met was in the warmest climate, in the world maybe. And now we're in possibly the coldest climate in the world. So we've hit both extremes at this point.
Exactly. So we actually met first in Hawaii. Jay was out there surfing and hanging out. And then now we're in Utah in the mountains, and where it is quite harsh. Maybe not the harshest in the world, but that's a little bit uncomfortable. So Jay, speaking of that, you do live sort of this nomadic lifestyle, and I'm interested in how you're able to do that, what you've learned from doing that, and what you enjoy most about that, or what are maybe some of the drawbacks.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, it started when basically after COVID, I think in 2021 there was a huge influx of people moving to Hawaii, and basically my girlfriend and I jumped on that trend. But that was kind of the original goal as well when I quit my job to start Interview Query and bootstrap a company, was the fact that I'd be able to live abroad and like live anywhere and work. And then COVID happened, and then everyone became remote. So it didn't become this thing where, I had the benefit of doing it myself. It was just kind of like a larger thing. And then it kind of transcended into, now continuing to move after Hawaii, basically to check out new places. And after living in SF for 5 years, it's surprisingly cost efficient not cost efficient, but it's
comparatively.
Comparatively, it's better than I would say being in SF and then taking vacations. Like it equals out. So it's actually cheaper than, getting a lease and just going on vacation, 1 week every 2 months or 3 months or something. So, and then also we have the benefit of being at home at my parents' house in between like different Airbnbs. So that works out well. But yeah, for me, I mean, I set up a camera because I also have a YouTube channel in like a different desk. I just try to get it by like a window, and then I do my videos, and then I take calls from different spots. And it's been working out pretty well, I guess, just because we don't have that many requirements.
Yeah. Well, I think something that's really cool is that since the more nomadic lifestyle has become more mainstream, a lot of people are comfortable doing it. And so it's not just you out there. Yeah. You can have a bunch of friends come around. I mean, there's 3 of us in this house. There, you said there was 9 people in your house for a month, a couple months at a time.
Yeah,
which is a very different way than I expected to at least live my life. I wouldn't say I'm truly nomadic, but I'm taking a month here to come to Utah. That's at least dipping my toe in the water.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any tips for me?
I don't know. I mean, I would say on our side, our kind of goal for this our main priority was kind of snowboarding and skiing. So I would say that it's definitely been interesting to try to curate community, because I think at the secondary, a lot of it has been kind of like sharing ideas and like basically having a good time with community people. Because when we did nomadic stuff with just, Cindy and I, we're just traveling around and we don't actually know anyone else in the places. So this one, I think what you're doing is pretty good, because you're already starting out with like 3 other roommates that are interesting, and they're also doing data stuff, and you can have collaborations. And you also know a lot of people in this area as well. So I think that's already great. Yeah. Like we've already met so many people. So, yeah. I mean,
I will say that is one of the coolest things about now having maybe a reasonable social presence from creating content, is that through LinkedIn, mostly through LinkedIn, less so through YouTube, I've been able to meet so many people.
Yeah.
And everyone who I've met is super nice, super welcoming. Like, oh, let's go get dinner. Let's go hang out. Let's do this. Let's do that. It's crazy. I feel like I could go to almost any reasonably sized city and be able to grab coffee with someone, be able to find things to do. I mean, you already know you have something in common. You're both in a similar industry.
Yeah.
That to me is really fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. You could just like tweet like I'm in New York City, right? And then someone will probably be like, I'm down to meet up within like a few minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
New York City is a rough one because it's like there's so many people. And
Yeah.
Like, how do I see everyone?
Yeah, that's true.
There's that other side of that where you're like, I feel obligated to see a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then if they find out you were there, they're like, oh, why didn't you say hi? But I digress. So I'm interested in your experience starting a startup in the data space and what you've learned, maybe also how the data space has changed since you guys entered.
Yeah, I mean, when we started, and I was just looking at this graph of people working at FANG companies, essentially in like the last 3 or 4 years, and how much hiring they did during COVID and before COVID, and how much they've kind of laid off now. Like if you look at the charts, it's like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Facebook, all 4 of those companies basically had either like half or 2/3 their headcount of what they have now, even after the layoffs. And so they just went to a huge hiring spree. So there was this huge bull market for all tech jobs, basically, in the past few years. And then recently of late, the only company that basically didn't do layoffs was Apple, right? But they also didn't grow as fast. So they only grew like 25% versus like, 50%, 75% for these other companies.
Well, and now Apple's also has their hands tied because now if they do layoffs, they lose all the goodwill that they had, even if it might make financial sense for them, which is a very interesting social pressure aspect to it.
Yeah, it's true. I think I don't know if they will do layoffs or not. I mean, that's a hard question, right? But I would say that the companies that haven't done layoffs are the ones that basically didn't try to grow super fast during COVID, which is like, if I talk to some friends, it's like Square, I think, is like the other key company that basically is still like slowly hiring because they didn't just try to like zoom up and hire a bunch during COVID. So yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I think the data space in general, like the things that we saw from our analysis recently, has been the fact that data science is more of an R&D type role, or maybe more of like this role where you're not getting defined outputs, almost, so to speak. Like they're not either maintaining infrastructure, which is data engineering, or like being revenue focused, which is kind of data analytics and, creating dashboards for executives. And so we're seeing less of those roles because maybe they have a longer time horizon and everyone's trying to maximize that like short-term cash flow right now. And so they really need to cut the jobs that aren't really, I guess, deemed critical in this point, or they don't need to hire for those roles. So, I mean, what we saw was December, year over year, data science jobs were kind of like cut almost in half, while data engineering and data analytics were fine. I want to see if this trend actually continues. I mean, it's really hard to predict. And, some of that is due to recessionary concerns where people want to hire for like roles that just don't pay as much. And data science commands a higher salary than a data analyst. Same with machine learning engineers. We're seeing a dip in that because machine learning engineers command an even higher salary than data scientists, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. But I mean, AI is not going anywhere. It's like the new hype thing for 2023. So it's not like data science is going to go anywhere either. I just think that there's going to be a reshift of like how people, apply these roles and how they kind of command these titles. And it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think that the lower portion of hiring for data science jobs was sort of an inevitability. So if we go back 5 years, there were essentially just data science jobs.
Yeah.
Right. And then, and data analyst jobs as well. There virtually were not any job titles called data engineers at all. There were no machine learning engineers either, to the best of my knowledge. And so the more of these like subcategories that we have, the more that effectively takes out of that data science pipeline. So I think that there is 100% likely that data companies are not hiring for data science roles because they're more expensive, like you described, and they're kind of shifting that hiring towards data analysts. But I also think it's like a little bit of a nomenclature thing where it's like we have these new roles. If there are 4 roles instead of 2 roles, they're going to be dispersed across that. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think we want more clarity about what each individual role does. Like historically, there's been this massive problem about what is a data scientist, and it still seems to be the case. Like it's pretty well defined what a data engineer does. It's pretty well defined what an ML, like a machine learning engineer does. Data analysts and data scientists are a little bit blurry, but data analysts are less expensive.
Yeah.
And so it's worth being blurry on a less expensive side. I also think you could argue that data analysts are more client facing and like their work is very tangible, whereas data scientists, sometimes they're doing data analyst work, but a lot of the times it is a little bit less certain. So I think that that's a pretty fascinating observation based on data that you're seeing.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in where that pans out in the future. Like what are we going to see in 3-4 years? I made this hypothesis maybe earlier this year that there will be a second coming of data science, machine learning engineers after a lot of data infrastructure is fixed. I mean, it seems like the last 2 years are really the 2 years where companies have been really focusing on data engineering, which is what they should have been focusing on before they were focusing on data science. And I would expect that that leads to better data science outcomes or better machine learning outcomes once they fix their shit, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think data engineering, yeah, you're right. It was always there. They were just called software engineers. And even now I feel like a lot of the
Or
data
database
engineers,
administrators.
or yeah,
whatever it
database
is,
administrators. Yeah, that's true. Which I think is even probably a little bit more different than some core data engineering and data infrastructure work. I think a lot of the people that I know who are data engineers actually just think of themselves as software engineers that just worked on data a lot, and then they got pigeonholed into that specialty, and now it's like extremely needed. So it's great, but it's not like they signed up for a job that was only, data engineering. It was always like, here's a software engineering role. Its opening is on like the data infrastructure team, but you can jump between teams if you want to, because we know that you're a competent engineer for anything, essentially back end, I'd assume, probably not front end at that point. So yeah, I think it's very interesting to see how that plays out. I also think it's interesting to see what kind of almost interview questions are going to be asked now that this is more of a defined role, mainly because that's like the product that I work on. Because of the fact that if you think about previously, it was almost always going to be leak code type questions, algorithm type questions, because they were just essentially software engineers. And now that they maybe expect some more data infrastructure work, you're probably going to see some more kind of like system design questions or questions around like SQL and, creating these pipelines. So I don't think there's actually really like a data engineering question that everyone kind of standardizes around at this point. It's just kind of like they go to leak code, they ask some questions, and then they go, what projects have you worked on in the past? Let me validate that you actually know what you're talking about. So it might get a little bit more structured, I think.
Yeah. Well, so how has the interview process changed since when you started Interview Query to now? That's something, or how have the questions changed?
I think it's just become a lot more structured, I would say, especially in terms of the fact that we're seeing a lot of this structure across the different question topics for the data analyst roles, the data science roles, maybe the ML engineering roles. There's more of an expectation now in which everyone understands that, a question about rotating a matrix is maybe not a good signal, right? Or, a specific NumPy matrix factorization question is like not a great signal. But if we want to ask, standardized questions around analytics and like, how do you investigate that this metric is going down and what the root cause of that's a little bit more kind of common, I would say. So I think they've just gotten a lot more standardized since. And then also with COVID, if you think about all these online, people didn't have resources to like collaborate as much. And so now a lot of this shift was going online towards like ed tech and people learning more things online. I'd say that also kind of changed the game in terms of people I think just seeing that like the information just spread more freely across the internet, across like, okay, what's expected, what's not expected, right? And recruiters became probably a lot more open with like, what's also expected on the interview going forward. Now, I don't really know how this is going to change now that we're shifting back to like in-person work and kind of this hybrid remote stage. I would say that, before in 2018 when we started Interview Query, or 2019, whenever it was, there was just not as much like out there in terms of what data science interviews were like. And now it's become, much more saturated, much more like common knowledge. Now there's a learning path that you can take to go from, a data science beginner all the way to getting a data science offer. And so I would say that it's interesting because it's just become a lot more structured, and like the information is out there and everyone kind of knows on both sides like what's expected.
Do you think that that's a better alternative?
I think so. I think it's better if you enjoy, like, if it's kind of like the standardization of anything, right? Versus being on the frontier of something. If you're on the frontier, then there's not as many rules. But if you're on the, if you're going for something that's already kind of standardized, like at the extreme case, we're thinking about like doctors or teachers or something, right? Where they have like set, things that you have to do to get to the next level. Or sorry, not teachers, maybe like doctors and lawyers, right? Like you got to pass the bar exam. You got to then pass your board if you're a doctor. You got to get like a really good MCAT score to get this thing. Like that's on the extreme example of standardization for what it takes. Whereas nowadays, that's like before in data science, it was kind of like, do you need a PhD? Maybe not. Like maybe. And then it was like, what actually means, what does it actually mean to be a data scientist? Like what kind of qualifications you actually need? And like there was no standardization around that. It was just kind of like, oh, you have some work experience previously at a prior company that said that you were a data scientist. Okay, now you can be a data scientist here. Or like, oh, you did like a PhD in economics, so now you can be a data scientist or something. There's no frontier in terms of like standardization of like the skills required. But now that you have to do a little bit of A/B testing, a little bit of stats, maybe some probability, really good at like, product metrics questions potentially. And yeah, it's a lot more kind of, it's out there. The information is out there if you want to be a data scientist.
I recently released the course that I wish I had had when I was starting out in the data science domain. It's called The Machine Learning Process from A to Z, and I partnered with 365 Data Science to build this. I also worked with my good friend, Jeff Lee, who's one of the most impressive data scientists I know, to get all of the implementation correct. This course is special for a couple reasons. So first, it focuses on the machine learning process. So you go from ideation to data collection to exploratory data analysis, all of the steps to building and implementing a data science project. It's all taken care of for you. We don't focus as much on the algorithms. This is all about getting a project out the door. Next, we've also open sourced all of our code and all of our examples on GitHub and Kaggle. Those are very easily accessible to everyone, including those people who just maybe want to see those and don't want to pay for the full course. In addition to that, we've included all of the resources that we use to build the course, so you're getting multiple different perspectives on every single concept rather than just our singular voice. I view this course as one of the most valuable things that I've put into the world, and I'm excited to hear what you think of it. I've included a discount link in the description for the YouTube video, as well as in the descriptions on all the other podcast platforms.
So I'll shift gears just a little bit. I was thinking when you were talking through that and about what we were saying before about the tech layoffs. So we're seeing this from massive tech companies, right? We're seeing it from Google, Amazon. We saw Meta a little while ago, Microsoft. Are we seeing a shrinking in non-major tech companies in data science roles as well? Or is it just these big tech companies really laying people off and like more traditional industry is doing fine on the recruiting? Or do you not have that data?
Yeah, actually what we're seeing is the traditional companies are doing fine actually. And I think that they're still hiring for a lot of roles. It's just that these FANG companies get all the glamour and everyone wants these huge, salaries. Everyone wants to compare, dick sizes on like their total comp, for lack of a better word there. I would say that in general, it's the glamour and like the allure of working at these big tech companies that kind of made it really hard for like traditional companies like JP Morgan Chase, like Booz Allen Hamilton, Capital One, Comcast, all these companies to actually hire. But if you look at the jobs right now, those are like the top 4 companies that are hiring, and they're hiring hundreds of data science jobs. Yeah. And it's pretty crazy because, you know, they've always been just like continuous growth types of companies, right? They would grow maybe like 2%, 5%, 10% year over year, but that wouldn't really attract the kind of, you know, big tech kind of data science, you know, candidates essentially.
So do you think that all these layoffs might change the perception about working at one of these FANG companies or one of these big tech companies? Or is it going to be like, I'm smart, I got in, it's never going to be me that's going to get fired. It's going to, you know, like, or is that still going to be the perception? I still want the prestige. You know, because like culturally, for example, Netflix, like you go in knowing you're probably going to get fired, right? Like it's up or out culture. Like you work there for 2 years and you leave. It's very rare for someone to stay there for a long time. Is that just going to be like, oh, that's part of the gig now and I still want it? Or do you think it might be more like, oh, there's a lot more stability in some of these other companies that are not maybe quite as sexy now, but I think keeping your job and having like consistency is a little bit sexy. Maybe I'm just old.
I think it's sexy now for sure. I mean, I think 2 years ago, it was definitely not sexy to be at, you know, a company that just had cash flow and didn't grow that fast, right? Because back then the game that was played was to grow as fast as you can and to, you know, raise a lot of money and to like hire a lot of engineers and, you know, kind of sell your product as being this like super cool, you know, be working at a tech company that's super cool, get free food, all that stuff, right? Get a lot of money, like kind of try to figure out how much you can negotiate with a recruiter. I was talking to a recruiter at Amazon the other day, and they were saying that at Amazon, people were routinely asking for 50% over the bands for what they had. They'd be like, oh, like, and they'd have to give it as well. They'd be like, oh, I got all these other offers, and so I want, you know, this from Amazon. And they would be like, oh my God, this is like, you know, 60% over what we like actually standardized for your level. And then they'd bring it to the hiring committee and they'd be like, yes, okay, we have to do this. So now that's not happening at all, right? Well, one, because they're not hiring in general, but also because of the fact that the market has completely changed. And I think that it's not a bad thing to work. I think the prestige is still there for the big tech companies, but it's not a bad thing to just work at and get a data science job or data analyst job at any other, you know, company at this point, and eventually pivot it into something better in a few years once, you know, the market has kind of shifted. But I do think that, you know, if we're talking about status games here, I mean, big tech is always going to be on top because of the fact that they can just pay more money, right? And then that's the only kind of measurable thing that you can quantify. No one can really quantify work-life balance, or it doesn't sound so sexy to be like, you know, I have 4 weeks of PTO and I work, you know, 7 hours, 6 to 7 hours a day, right? Like that, no one's like bragging about that. Maybe they are a little bit more now, but like, I don't know, they weren't doing that before. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I've been learning and talking to a lot of people actually on this trip, mostly Zach Wilson, about like tech pay and the way you're compensated and getting options and having like all these different structures for like salary and negotiation. And to me, it's a lot of it's sort of like gambling. Like you're betting on the company, the total compensation is ridiculous, but at the same time, a lot of it is wrapped up in equity that vests over time. And it is a very complex and overly complicated system, rather than just being like, here, we'll give you money, you come work for us. It's like, no, we'll give you money now and we'll give you a little more in 2 years if you do a good thing, and then your bonus will be like 60% if you do this, and you know, if you do XYZ by this date and time, you can get a little bit more. Do you think that complexity is like meaningful at all, or would it be better if it was more simple?
I mean, I actually think that the tech company complexity isn't too bad if it's like an IPO'd company. I think the startup ones are kind of shrouded more in mystery, and those ones actually don't work in favor of the candidate because they'll say, you know, we have this many options, you're getting like 10,000 shares. Well, how much money is that really, right? Like you can't really, you have to do a little bit more mental math or like kind of, public math in terms of trying to figure out exactly, how much you're getting in negotiation. But at least like the tech companies, they'll tell you like, all right, you're going to make this much this year. And then, if you do really well, we'll give you a refresher. But a lot of it, is dependent on the fact that the RSUs for the company have to, like, that's what they're kind of banking on, is that they're going to continue to go up, right? And now that they're not continuing to go up, it's a different story for all those compensations, especially the ones that were given last year in the peak of 2022, like right around January to March,
when, like,
right?
The market was all the way up.
Yeah, exactly. And if you had gotten 100K in shares then, they'd only be worth like 30K now. And so a lot of people
almost across the board.
Exactly. Like literally, I think everyone is slowly realizing that, okay, wow, like I thought that this was going to be 200K. Now it's 30. Like, what do I do now? Maybe I should over index on like, base pay and get like more base salary, right, at another company. But honestly, it's probably just smarter if, especially if you're looking for a new job now, to find just a growth company that's cheap. Honestly, any company like Facebook, even, like their stock is so cheap. If you get 100K now, it's, basically that person who got 100K back then got 30K. So if you got 100K now, you're essentially getting it for 3x the price, right? Because it's just so much cheaper. And now maybe Facebook will go back up. But it's definitely interesting. You want to go against the curve, right? You want to go against the people, against the grain. You want to be contrarian in this case, right? And you want to buy low. And the best way to buy low is to get a job at a tech company now, I guess, essentially.
Yeah, that does take some form of risk appetite, which is also kind of important to think about, is that I think a lot of people who are younger in their career and they want status and these types of things, their risk appetite is high because, if I was making $400,000 a year and I lost my job, hopefully I wasn't spending it all, and there is some cushion, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I was actually talking about this yesterday with a friend, which they were saying like, okay, if you were making, 400K a year and then you like essentially use that to get a mortgage or something in the San Francisco Bay Area, now your total comp isn't that high anymore. And now you still have to make those mortgage payments, right? It's like you were assuming that it was going to be 400K consistently. Like now maybe you've even been laid off, right? Now you have to like somehow get that money back. That's not like possible. So it's almost like every other kind of gambling investment thing from like 2021, 2022, crypto, like any one of those things, because you thought you had a lot. And then hopefully your lifestyle creep didn't like increase to that amount. Especially when it comes to bigger things like housing or car payments and, responsibilities and stuff.
I mean, that to me is probably the most scary thing, is that when you're reliant on one source of income and it's very high, if you lose your job, I mean, yes, there's severance, but you're solely dependent on that one thing. And you like to be able to recreate that, like think how much more stress that puts on the job search, where you're like, oh my goodness, if I have this high cost of living and I don't land a job in 6 months, I'm not gonna be able to afford my house. I'm not gonna be able to do this. Hopefully you'd be able to afford a job and find a job in 6 months. But yeah, I mean, you never know. It's people don't feel a lot of sympathy for the tech people that are losing their jobs. But inevitably, like, yes, they were making a lot of money, but your quality of living and the decisions you make from there, it's an immense amount of pressure, immense amount of stress on them. Yeah. Just because of like that sort of, I guess it's almost like rug pulling yourself.
Yeah, like, exactly. And that's something that we've learned too, is just like managing risk in this day and age, especially because our business is so dependent upon like big tech companies. So it's like, if I had hindsight, or something that I've learned over the past year is like, how do you hedge your risk in any one of these scenarios, right? Even if you're working at a tech company too, you do have to think about it, because the majority of your equity or your net worth may potentially just be in the stock of this company, right? Until you get that payment. Yeah. And I've talked to friends that now, after this whole tech crash, are basically saying stuff like, essentially once I hit the 1 year mark of my RSUs, I'm going to sell it all immediately because I still have 3 more years of this and 3 more years of my, like, you know, kind of this equity down the line that's basically dependent on this company's stock. And if it goes bad or it falls by 50%, then that's my net worth falling by 50% there, right? So,
well, I'm probably a little biased, but I am a huge believer that everyone should have more than one stream of income. You know, especially
Yes.
if you have, if you're making good money, you're working at one of these. Let's say you're making over even like $100,000 a year. Assuming you don't have a family, assuming you're in like a growth phase of your life, there's opportunities to invest in real estate. There's opportunities. Maybe the stock market isn't the best idea if you don't have a lot of risk appetite.
yeah.
I mean, maybe right now it's probably not a bad time to get in the stock. This is not financial advice.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at
You
finance,
need that
but-
disclaimer at the beginning of this podcast now.
Exactly. But I think that, you know, finding other ways, whether it's side hustles, whether it's hobbies, I felt so much more freedom after I realized that I could make money doing not just a 9 to 5 job, right? Something clicked when I was like, oh, I got my first AdSense check on YouTube. I got paid for writing a blog article. The ability to make money is a skill. And that to me is something that once you get it and you learn it, you never lose it. And so you start seeing opportunities, you start being able to capitalize on them, you develop another skill that's not your main, like, high value skill. Because who knows, like, in theory, I don't think this will happen, to be very clear, but in theory, an AI could get sophisticated enough at coding that it makes a lot of engineering somewhat obsolete, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do not think this will happen anytime soon. But if that happened, what skill would you fall back on, right? For
Yeah.
me, I would fall back on communication, podcasting, networking, connecting people. Those are things that I've indexed on fairly highly, and I know that those things can make me money. But, you know, if I was completely reliant on that singular skill set of engineering and data science, I'd have to do all that learning to pivot then. And you don't want to do that when it's too late. Also, you get massive benefits by 2 compounding skills. So like my ability to communicate or meet people, network, whatever it is, and my data science ability, 1 + 1 = 3 in that case, because there are less people who share those same skill sets.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like choosing 2 classes in an RPG rather than just choosing one.
Yeah, I would say also you make a good point there about like diversifying that income source because, you know, theoretically, if let's say data science as a whole just plummeted, right? Like no one cares about data science anymore, right? Then it's not only just that our data science skills go out of, you know, don't make us any money anymore. It's the data science content that we generate that also doesn't make us any money more, right? Because the market essentially determines how well we're going to do in general. And so I think that's pretty good. It's like, sure, what you come out of it is that you have these like understanding of how to like make money within a specific market. And you can always apply that to another market, right? Which is, I think, the crucial kind of takeaway there. But a lot of it is very much market dependent, which is, I think, what we're slowly starting to learn, especially with, you know, the rise and the fall of the past 2 or 3 years. And it's good to be diverse. It's good to like hedge your risks. It's good to basically take something away from, you know, what you learned, even if you're failing or if the market fails, because at least you're taking these skills away as well. And yeah, I think it's just it's a key point, I think, in general. And that we're kind of like, there are larger forces at play here, right?
Yeah. When I was, how old was I? When I was in high school, my senior year of high school, we got to choose a book to read for one of my English classes. And I chose the like biography of Miyamoto Musashi. And one of his most famous quotes is that once you find the way or see the way in one thing, you see it in all things. And I think that concept applies to like finances, right? Once you find a way to make money, or once you find a system that works, you can apply that across multiple domains, across a lot of, you know, different things. And there's something really, really powerful in that. I think that might also be like one of Joe Rogan's favorite quotes, but I read it first.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of touched around it. I'm interested in what advice you would have. I'm interested in what advice you would have for someone who lost their job at one of these big tech companies in this job market.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think a lot of this is kind of more almost like life curation advice more than anything else in terms of deciding what you want to do next. This is definitely something I've thought about too, because when you're thinking about the next stage in your career, a lot of it kind of the choices that you have are definitely held back by some constraints. And I think for me, a lot of the way that I've kind of navigated that in my past career has been basically looking at, what are the options on the table? What are the constraints of each? For example, get another data science job, right? Constraint there is that I'm working, 9 to 5 on weekdays. It's a pretty normal job. I have stability of income. At the same time, maybe not flexibility of what I want to do all the time. Versus, maybe start a startup, right? Then you have your own constraints there in terms of, how much money you have to make. Basically, you're not making as much money for sure. You have to raise money. You have to probably work a lot. But at the same time, you have a lot of control. You don't have a boss, right? And then you think about all these options. You put them on the table. And for me, I think it's about like figuring out what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then kind of where you can kind of dive in from there. But yeah, definitely a huge part has been just like understanding the constraints of your choices, and really picking the right thing is actually a lot kind of underrated, I would say, because it's usually something that you do for the next like 2 to 5 years, even if you don't think that it's going to be that long. Like if you think like, oh, I'm going to just take this data science job right next, or I'm going to take this data engineering job next, or I'm going to pivot into data analytics, and then maybe if I just don't like it after a year, I can always quit, right? But at the same time, you're putting in that investment into what is ideally going to be the next 5 years, right? Like even if you just take a data science job, you're basically pushing yourself to then kind of climb up into being a more and more experienced data scientist at that point. And so you have more, I guess, momentum towards becoming a better data scientist versus maybe doing a startup or like kind of pivoting into like becoming more of a business founder or something like that. So I do think it takes a lot of time to really like apply a framework to understand, what you should do next. And yeah, I mean, each one has their own constraints.
Yeah, I think obviously it is not good that all these people lost their jobs. It's a terrible situation. But on the other hand, I think that for a lot of these people, especially if they're earlier in their career, this is sort of like possibly a once in a lifetime experience to like reevaluate and make a pivot, right? A lot of us are looking for excuses to make a career change. We don't like our job or something along those lines, and we just never do it because of the golden handcuffs. For those, like 50,000 people, this is an opportunity to do something different, or to really self-evaluate and think about, okay, what direction do I want to go? Was what I was doing worth it? Did I enjoy it? If you got laid off, maybe you didn't really enjoy what you were doing, maybe because your output wasn't necessarily as good. Obviously, some highly qualified people got laid off just because whole departments and stuff were cut. But I think that is a very, possibly a more positive spin to put on things, is like, okay, that, what other time are you going to have to reevaluate like this? I mean, I think that happened to a lot of people. It happened to me during COVID, is like the world shut down and I got to sit there and have some time off and be like, okay, well, what do I want to do? How do I want to change myself? I have time right now. I can work on something. I can develop a new skill. I can do the world is significantly more your oyster than when you're trapped in a more traditional hamster wheel of like going to work every day. I would say to anyone that is in that position, like, yes, it sucks, but capitalize on it. Don't necessarily just, you can wallow in it for a couple of days. That's totally fair. Again, it does suck, but like this is an opportunity as much as it is something that is negative happening in your life.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right there. I think it allows for, more than anything else, actually freedom of space and freedom to kind of think, because these major life events, while really tough, do contribute towards getting you out of that like existing space that you were in before. So, I mean, I agree. I think that if you are on the hamster wheel for a really long time, it's really nice to be able to jump off and hopefully don't let that anxiety kind of like come in around, probably stuff around finances and stuff and kind of what you're going to do and like not really understanding what the next thing is. But it's like kind of a half glass full versus half empty kind of mindset, right? You have to think about this as, what should I like be doing next? Like, what opportunities are now available to me, and what are the different choices that I can kind of narrow down on that I didn't have a chance to before. So
yeah, it's very interesting. I talk to a lot of people, and not just on the podcast. The podcast is a little different, but just in general life, whether it's data scientists, whether it's people early in their career, and if you ask them where they want to go, like what their goals are longer term, there's a lot of people are just like, I don't know. I just am doing this right now and it makes good money and I want to do it because it's a good career. And I think that there's a level beyond that. Like, what direction do you want to take? Who do you want to be? What drives you? What is more related to purpose in your life? And once you start answering those questions, I think your quality of life and your happiness and those types of things go way up. It's a weird metaphor, but for example, in jiu-jitsu, right? A lot of people go just because it's good exercise. It's they're like kind of weekend warriors. They go just because it's like leisure in some sense.
yeah.
And whenever I go train, I ask like, are you working on anything? And almost universally, like, oh no, I'm just like moving around. I just want to practice.
Yeah.
And those people are not going to improve their skills. Mm-hmm. They might get a little bit better over time, but if they're just going through the motions and they're just going into work, they're just going into train to just do it, you're not going to make a whole lot of progress.
Yeah.
If you say, oh, I'm working on this specifically to get to this point to be able to do this move, and you're actually practicing it, you're going to learn those things, right? You're going to get there. And then there's something I think so fascinating, especially for me. When I was in the workforce, I was the person who was just like, I'm here, I'm just working.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, I'm trying to get to this point. Unfortunately for me in my own work, I'm the opposite. I'm like, I want to go exactly here. These are the steps I need to take it. But this is maybe the best possible time to actually evaluate that and then take the steps in order to get to where you want to be. And if if you're focused on your family, focused on other things, and work is just like, it's just a means to an end, that's totally fine. But identify that and make sure that you're comfortable with that as well.
Yeah, I do think that there is this glorification with also entrepreneurship and kind of like doing your own thing. And I would say that, it's not all great. Also, I think that a lot of the times we get over index on a lot of that versus being able to just, have a good job and then have the flexibility to do other things in life. And I think also figuring out those different kind of proportions that you want to invest time into, like especially jiu-jitsu and hobbies as well, right? Like you're not going to I'm sure you're not going to make you're not going to grovel to make 10% more this year if you can't do jiu-jitsu at all, right?
100% would not. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like finding those thresholds, right?
Yeah.
To figure out what's worth it for just living. And I would say getting laid off sucks, but it definitely helps you reevaluate that, especially if you were working a ton before and, not really understanding what else you were, you enjoyed out of life and stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, I think those thresholds are very different for everyone.
Yeah.
Someone
definitely
might be like, screw jiu-jitsu, I'm making 10% more. That means a lot. And, but at the same time, I think that there's this overarching idea that we have to, there's this overarching idea that entrepreneurship is like a holy grail. Maybe I speak it up a little bit too much, but just like the jiu-jitsu versus finances trade-off is different for me. For someone else, entrepreneurship might be absolutely terrible. There's people that hey, I want to I can execute incredibly well. Just tell me what I need to do and I will do it better than anyone else. that's an unbelievably valuable skill set, but it's not an entrepreneurial skill set, right?
I feel like it's pretty good. Like if you get the right ideas, right?
Yeah,
And you
but
can
that's the
execute on
problem.
that. Yeah.
Is that, like, I think the entrepreneurial side is more on the idea and the ability to take risk.
Yeah.
There's another like archetype of people who are amazing at execution. They want simplicity, straightforwardness, and like security.
Yeah.
And like, there's nothing wrong with wanting that. There's nothing wrong with being good at that. It just doesn't coincide with entrepreneurship. I'm not saying either path is right. There are two different paths, and there's infinite different paths, to be completely fair.
Yeah.
But that is one that is like completely different from entrepreneurship and totally fine. For me, I like that would be boring to me. But for someone else, entrepreneurship would be completely terrifying because there's so many unknowns.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say for most people, actually, because of the risk taking, and it's definitely a roller coaster ride, I would say, and it's hard to also like figure out exactly what to do next when you're an entrepreneur, right? Because it's not like anyone's like literally no one's telling you what to do next, so it's like you got that freedom, but then you got also the downsides of like having to consistently be right all the time, or maybe fail and not, fail too badly and take the entire company or whatever you've built down. So I would say that it's all hard. And you really have to just like try to forecast the future, see what your life path looks like down that route, and then try to see if that's what you want.
Yeah, I would say I'll push back a little bit. I think entrepreneurship is a lot more common than we generally think about. So we think about entrepreneurship as like doing a startup, working in tech, whatever it might be. But like everyone who starts a restaurant is an entrepreneur. Everyone who opens a little store on the corner, a mom and pop shop, like everyone who starts any type of brick and mortar, like they're all doing entrepreneurship. And there's probably 30 million. I don't have no clue how many restaurants there are. Probably market size, maybe like 320 million people.
This is an interview question.
Yeah,
how many restaurants are there in Salt Lake
Let's say
City?
that there's one restaurant for every 10 people.
Yeah.
That's probably way too completely unrealistic. One for every 100 people.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
so
fair.
3 million restaurants in the US. But, that's 3 million entrepreneurs. Maybe
Yeah.
there's some overlap with people starting multiple, but I digress, right?
Yeah.
The number of people who are involved in entrepreneurship is, I think, higher than what a lot of people would consider.
Yeah.
And we also don't there's like a highbrow and lowbrow entrepreneurship, where like highbrow is like, oh, I'm gonna start this $1 billion unicorn startup.
Yeah.
Where like some auntie in Hawaii is opening a shop, like selling musubi on the road. Like that's entrepreneurship in the
that's
same
true.
way, right?
Even at a farmer's market. I mean, there's different levels of it, right? And that's actually the one tip I'd give to someone who wants to actually dip their feet into, is just like take a smaller risk first. Like for me, when I started Interview Query, I was working at Nextdoor at the same time and then just working on it at the side. Like little to no downside if it failed, right? Because then I still have my job. So I would say like if you can still just kind of like do small jumps into it, right? Like start like selling at a farmer's market before opening a restaurant. I think that's the general kind of state of progress there, because you want to test to see if your food's actually good. Then that's generally how like I think most people kind of get started as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. I think that there's this like glamorization of entrepreneurs that like, it's like the rapper that gets a face tattoo in high school because they're like, I don't want a job. I just want to like make music, and this is going to force me to do it. I think there's like something similar in entrepreneurship where it's like, screw my job. I'm going to go all in and focus on this 100%. And that can work. But I also think that from a data perspective, it's a lot more scientific to see if like to A/B test and see and like iterate and grow, because I mean, I would burn out real fast if I was putting all this effort in with virtually no return to begin with.
Yeah. And your appetite for risk grows as you get more successful, I would say too, right? Because initially you probably aren't, I don't think anyone has like that huge amount of risk in them all to go from like stable job to just starting a business and quitting their job and doing it full time. Like it takes incremental levels of jumps, unless you always wanted to do that, of course, then, you kind of know what you want to do then. But like, I think it's kind of an incremental thing. You kind of like, you're testing out, you're like, oh, like, I made a little bit of money. This is awesome. And like, it's kind of supplementing my regular income. And I kind of like the flexibility of, being able to control how this goes. And then you get like a little bit more of a taste. And then eventually, maybe it sucks you in entirely, or maybe you just kind of want to like leave it at that and just have this side hustle that kind of just, runs that you can do on the side. That's kind of your passion, and you don't hate it because it's only just a side hustle, right? Before it consumes you and like kind of takes over your life, maybe. So.
Well, I mean, that's been interesting for me with YouTube and content, right? Like, it still kind of is a side hustle. I mean, frankly, financially, I do fairly well.
Yeah.
But I still enjoy it 100%. Like, I'm not going to make a podcast. I'm not going to make a video if I'm not having fun. Like, that would be the death of me. But on the other side, I remember how cool it was to make my like first dollar.
Yeah.
Then to like be like, oh, like with content, I can cover my rent.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like, I wonder what would happen if I could cover my whole cost of living with content, and then everything that I made outside of that in my actual job, I could just keep. Like, that was like, oh my goodness, like, what the heck? And then it's like, oh, like, I can cover my cost of living with this, and I got some over the top. Like, my cost of living has not changed. I have like no desire to have a fancy car or anything, or maybe just travel, but work covers a lot of my travel. So it's like, oh, like, I get to keep a lot of this money, and then I just keep investing it back into like new camera equipment or things that make the content better. And there's like, it's cool to think that I don't have to like take anything out, right? You can just put it all in when you don't have to rely on the financial side of it to just make the content and everything better, which to me is really cool.
Yeah, we talked about content businesses before, and I think they're very interesting, especially when we think about using them as leverage, right? Like, especially like repurposing content and like, kind of taking that existing content and figuring out different ways to kind of like monetize it. And I would say that it's definitely high leverage. It's really, really easy to kind of get started in, but hard to make good. And like, I think that's also something that I struggled with initially with seeing all these YouTubers, is just be like, wow, like these guys are so good, and you can't really see how much effort they put in to be like really good at it at this time. And especially, I mean, you've filmed like over 100 podcasts, right? At this point, like 200,
100 and this will be like 134.
Yeah, exactly. So like to get to that level,
you'd think I'd be better at podcasting.
No, that's not true. No, I mean, look at Joe Rogan, right? Like he has like 2,000 now. So it's like this guy's pinnacle of podcasting. So, but it's like then you have to do 2,000 podcasts to get there, and then most people aren't willing to put in that effort to get to that 2,000 level mark. So
there's a couple YouTubers or content creators that basically say like all your videos are garbage until your 100th video. And it's pretty true. Actually, right around, I remember my 100th video came out when I had around 10,000 subscribers.
Oh, really?
And then essentially right after that, it like 2 months later I had 100,000.
Wow.
So it was one of these things where it was like, maybe the algorithm includes that as well. There's like a corpus of my work or whatever it might be, but also, the quality of my work was steadily improving. I think now, hopefully my video production quality and stuff is better. I'm trying to have more themes in the videos. I'm trying to take more of a nuanced approach to actually video creation. But I don't feel like I was improving like I was when I was first starting, because every video I had this goal of doing something a little bit better.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm going to try a different camera angle. I used to have this problem where I would like reach for the camera to stop it right when I finished talking. So the videos would end with me like that. But like I would do it while I was finishing what I was saying. So I finally got out of that habit. And there's like a lot of little things where I was like, okay, like that was the improvement. I made that video great.
Yeah.
And I would keep track of them. And now it's just like, I guess that my content is also transformed, where it's a little bit different as well. So there's less obvious things, but.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think on my side for content, it's a lot about ideas and like how to generate better ideas, because when it comes to ultimately kind of like building that content. A lot of it is about just kind of framing your ideas in a way that I think makes sense, especially when you're writing and doing the mediums across writing versus kind of YouTube, where you have a little bit more creativity in terms of like how you present those ideas and like how you might repurpose them from existing ideas and stuff. But when it comes to writing and generating better ideas, I think that's where I'm like, okay, I gotta write like 1,000 articles or something to get really good at this whole generation of ideas thing. Because if I can't do it right now, eventually, after I keep on practicing and getting better at it, I'll eventually be able to do it much better down the line, I would assume. And hopefully, AI will help out with some of that too, maybe, but who knows?
Yeah. I was like, maybe I'm not great at asking ChatGPT questions yet, but when I ask for video ideas and things like that, I'm just sorely disappointed. It's super, super basic.
Yeah, it's just scraping from online, or it's using all that, former data, and it's like not good. It's actually, I heard that the best way you should do it is that you should ask ChatGPT for ideas and then just don't write any of those ideas and just use that as an elimination list so that you write something completely different, because they're just giving you what is already common. So then now you can think of new ideas once you figured out what's already common, right? So
interesting. Or you just look at the really common ones and see what hasn't been made a whole lot. That was something like, I made a video, is data science a good career? Like, no one's ever made that video before. It's like super obvious.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
So one of my subscribers recommended that to me. It was, they analyzed my YouTube data on Kaggle, and that was one of the things they're like, you should make a video on this very basic topic that you have not made a video on and no one else has before. And I was like, all right. I wish I remember the person's name.
Oh, wow. How did they get that from like your past YouTube data?
They just looked at all the video titles and stuff like that. Maybe it was like their recommendation, but it was pretty good. Yeah.
Huh.
Jay, those are all the questions I had. Are there any things that you're working on? Anything you want to share? Any way people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to follow me, I have 2 main platforms that I'm kind of producing content on, or sorry, 3 actually. YouTube, LinkedIn, and then I'm also doing a Substack that's not really data science focused, but more kind of like,
it's just about surfing and snowboarding.
Yeah, I wish I had more content about surfing and snowboarding actually, but it is a lot about more like business, AI stuff, anything that comes to the top of my head, probably like personal finances. But yeah, please follow me there, and if you're interviewing, check out Interview Query. And yeah, that's it.
Amazing. I will link everything in the description. I also think I have a discount code for Interview Query.
You do, yes.
Which will also be in the description.
Yes.
So be sure to check that out. And Jay, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken.